In this lesson, I'm going to show you something you can do, a way to practice, that will greatly improve your improvisation and get you closer to playing the authentic music that's inside you rather than, scales and memorized patterns. All through this course on improvisation, I've been talking about playing the music inside you rather than the notes that are manufactured on your instrument. And to dramatize that, I sometimes call it the machine, right? Whatever yours is. Now, you still may not know what I'm talking about or that distinction that I make. So in this lesson, I want to tackle it from a different angle. I like to use the word friction when I talk about what happens when less experienced or less skilled players improvise. There's a friction between their musical mind and what comes out of their instrument when improvising. This is extremely complex translation that must occur using your mouth, your arms, your fingers, your lungs, whatever you use to create your music and translate it from your emotion or musical imagination. There's a lot to ask. But keep in mind that all your instrument is, regardless of what instrument it is an amplifier for the music in your imagination. In our book, The Framework for Jazz Mastery, Richie Byrek calls this the process called heart, ear, hand. An emotion is sensed, which translates to music heard inside, and that manifests itself in his hands hitting the keys that express the emotion he's feeling and that musical translation of it. But Richie, or any master, has already got such a close connection between their musical mind and their instrument that the instrument does become, that reflection, that amplifier, that translator of the emotion or music that they're hearing inside them. So the question continues to be how to build or closely connect your musical mind to your instrument. Let's start with an example of a less experienced improviser playing over some simple 1-6-2-5 changes. Something you'd find in rhythm changes. I've Got Rhythm, Flintstones, Oleo, songs like that. Now, typically, that improviser, that inexperienced improviser, will aim for chord tones or, scale tones. They see B flat major 7 and they think B flat major scale. They may even start on B flat since that's the root of the scale and that's what comes to mind soonest. Does that sound familiar? So let me give you an example. I'm going to play an example and I'm going to blank out the screen because I really want you to listen to what I'm playing rather than see, right? Just like hopefully when you improvise using your ears over your eyes. And again, I'm going to play something that a less experienced improviser may sound like. And I'm going to contrast this in a bit, but I want to orient you to, and I'm going to ask you to make a distinction. So that might sound something like this. Okay. Now everybody plays differently. That may not have sounded like you, but if you're concentrating on scales and you're staring at changes while you improvise, that may sound similar to some of how you improvise. And by the way, we all go through that stage. But now I want to give you an exercise to get you away from that kind of improvising that I just demonstrated. I'm going to sing over those chords, and I'm going to ask you later on to do exactly the same. I'm going to give you a little process for this, because by now you know that I'm a huge advocate of singing. It's the direct connection with your mind, and it's the clearest indication of the music that's inside you outside of just silently thinking about it. But this enables you to kind of manifest it. We're going to use that in a second. So I'm going to sing over that progression, and then we're going to talk about it. Oh, I don't need my horn. Then we're going to talk about it. Ba ba do bon do do ba boom ba bum bo do bo do 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 da do da da do do da do do. Okay, what's the difference between what I played earlier on the trombone and what I just sang? And we all know that I played it on trombone and I sang, but I'm not asking you about that. I'm asking you musically, what was the difference? What was the difference in the phrasing? You know, what was the difference? Well, I don't want to give too much away because I want you to think about this. Because I think you could replicate this, and I want you to replicate this comparison for yourself, which is what I'm about to show you how to do. Because you're going to use this as a very powerful tool to improvise more authentically the music that's inside you. So maybe go back and listen to both and write down some of the differences that you heard. All right, let me share with you what I heard. First of all, the trombone wasn't very musical. You know, the solo used very narrow intervals, which is what scales are constructed with. The singing had, you know, a variety of intervals. The rhythms of the notes on the trombone solo were also, you know, very mechanical. Da, 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 da. Listen to the rhythms of the sung solo. You know, the time was flowing rather than, you know, halting. That's the word. The trombone solo was kind of, you know, very mechanical, very halting. Except for the last notes, all the note durations on the trombone solo were short. You know, again, that da, 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 da. The singing had a nice variety of note lengths. Ba, boo, ba, ba. Right? And that phrase is also an example of the wider intervals. Notice that there were dynamics in the sung solo, and that made the phrases more musical. There was also very little dynamic variety in the trombone solo phrases. Everything was flat dynamically. Notice also that the phrases in the trombone solo all seem to start on beat 1 or, you know, maybe beat 3. But jazz is a music of syncopation. 1 and 3 over and over and over is very dull. You know, there were more interesting beginnings to the sung solo, like, you know, notes that started or phrases that started across the bar or anticipating before the bar. And there was a little bluesy inflection at the end of the sung solo. Da, 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 da. You know, that's always nice. The trombone solo was all very vanilla, you know, boring. And of course, that lovely last note on the trombone solo. But when you're running scales or just notes rather than playing music, you know, you can end up in bad places, unpredictable places. You know, it's a great example of not anticipating where you're going musically. So find the track that you like the best, at least to start this exercise with, and sing a solo over that track. Now, at the bottom of this lesson, I've given you all 3 tracks, and what I've done is recorded 4-bar phrase, 8-bar phrase, 8-bar phrase, 8-bar phrase, so you can kind of do it over and over and kind of keep that 8-bar phrase, you know, thing going. So make sure that you keep it musical, make sure that you keep it simple, and make sure that you record it. You've got to record this. That's where the juice of this exercise is and what I'm about to show you. So once the singing's been recorded over one of those tracks, transcribe the sung solo. Because yes, I want you to get this on paper. Writing things down, music and other things, has its benefits, right? It ingrains it into our brains. You know, goals, New Year's resolutions, there's a certain power to writing things down. But if you don't read music, then just memorize what you sang from the recording so you can play it on your instrument. The important part of this lesson is to play that solo on your instrument, either from memorizing it or writing it down. And when you play it on your instrument, I mean play it exactly. The same phrasing, the same articulation, the same rhythms, the same nuances. And to do that, first play the solo over the recording of your singing. And you'll know when you're doing it right because your notes will mask the singing. You'll be kind of shadowing them. Now, let me give you an example of me playing over my earlier singing example. And again, I'm going to black this out because I want you to listen and hear the singing versus the playing. Okay, and that will sound something like this. Okay. Could you hear how closely I played over my sung solo? And I'm going to separate those on channels so you can kind of really get a good comparison. Now, as an aside, I highly recommend playing like this over recordings of singers. You know, that gets you playing outside of the typical idiomatic, style of your instrument. And by the way, do this when you listen to solos on other instruments. But I really recommend singers, finding singers that you like how they phrase, and being able to play exactly the way with the nuance that they played. Okay, back to this exercise. How you record and play all of this is going to depend on your technology, right? Ideally, you have some sort of digital audio workstation like GarageBand or Logic, Cubase, Ableton Live. But if you own a Mac, you already have GarageBand on your machine. And it's a very simple program to learn, and it does what I'm demonstrating perfectly well. But, if you need to, you can simply use your phone and then play it with headphones or earbuds so that you can really put this under the microscope, because the details of how you're phrasing and doing this is where a lot of the magic lies. Once you're able to play your sung solo accurately with articulation and pitch and rhythm, next play the solo on your instrument over the rhythm track without your singing. And I've provided rhythm tracks that have the 8-bar phrases over and over so you can practice and see how closely you can get. But now, here's where the magic is. You're playing your authentic music on your instrument. It's not being led by scales, hopefully, patterns or licks. You're playing the music that's in your mind. And as you do this, I want you to feel what it's like to play something that's authentically you without thinking about chords or scales. So, don't just do this once. Do this with the other rhythm tracks I've given you, or Aebersold tracks, or iReal tracks, or whatever inspires you. Because I think the more often you go through this exercise, the closer that you're going to get to building the connection between the music in here and your instrument. And it trains you to play outside of the idiomatic constraints of your instrument. You're not singing like a tenor sax player. You're not singing like a piano player, and I think that's a good thing. It gets you out of just kind of that muscle memory. Now, maybe you're self-conscious about singing. Well, get used to it. Get over it. This is a tool to help you improvise more authentically and to connect you to your instrument. Just like anything else in your life, you'll get better just by keeping doing it. Resist the temptation also to sing complicated stuff. Leave that to your instrument, because you're more proficient with your instrument. You'll get there, but for this exercise, think melodic, think simple, because through your singing, you're simply being as musical as possible. Like I didn't sing, right? We could do that, and that's kind of cool, but I think as a first step, walk before you run. Play simple, think melodic. If you need some inspiration for your singing, listen to some of your favorite music before doing this exercise. It doesn't mean you're going to copy what you heard, but it gets you kind of on the launching pad to be a little bit inspired. Now, as I've said frequently through this course and elsewhere, get good at practicing. There are many other different ways that you can accomplish musical things like this, So discover what works for you. And for more on how to practice better, look at Module 6 on practicing, because I've included a bunch of tips in those lessons, just like this one. Well, not just like this one, but how to kind of be creative in figuring out ways to practice. So for a little bit in your practice time, engage in this exercise. And If the singing part seems awkward at first, you just got to be brave to, play with your own musical voice. And that includes how you practice and how you develop your skills. In fact, I'm going to leave you with a clip from my interview with Joe Lovano, where I ask him about the element of courage in improvising and playing with one's own musical voice. Dig this. And when you think about players who have their unique voice, I think there's also another element of it, and maybe we'll call it courage, to be able to, stand up and play in a way that may not be the way your instrument's supposed to sound, but something that comes from you that doesn't sound like anybody else. Does that make sense? Is there an element of courage to that?
Well, I mean, yeah, you have to be brave, you know, to explore ways of playing together that take you out of any kind of routine, so you can be more expressive. I mean, that's the goal for me, is to be more expressive each time I play, and to try to relax into the setting, and who you play with will help shape that. The more different folks you play with throughout your lifetime, you start to realize a lot of things, and to not be in that routine of playing the saxophone or playing the drums. There's a lot of great drummers that play the drums and they don't play the music. You could still have fun and get through it, but it's not the same. That courage, like you mentioned, man, brings something to mind. I play a lot with Gonzalo Rubalcaba through the years, with Charlie Hayden and in different groups. And we did a duet recording called Flying Colors for Blue Note Records. And I guess it was late 90s, somewhere there. Anyway, we had some touring, and for about a year when that recording came out, we had a lot of different gigs as a duet. And I was playing some drums and different horns, and it was an amazing exchange of ideas, So we played at Yoshi's in Oakland, and Joe Henderson came to hear us. And I didn't know he was there until we came off from our set. And as I was walking through the club, Joe was there. And we said hello, and he looked at me and he said, "That was brave." And that was it. And it felt so good to have his embrace like that. He didn't say, "Oh, you did this, you did that, oh man, No, it was like, "Yeah, man, that was brave." And I learned a lot right at that moment about trying to relax and be as expressive as possible, and not try to impress or play from that point of view. Your attitude is everything when you're playing. And you can get caught up in all kind of weird head trips that take away from the music.